Hey everyone, great to see you. Thanks for dropping by. My guest today is Quinsin Nachoff, extraordinary saxophonist and composer. And when I tell you that we're going to talk about math, algorithms, and using computer software to create music, you might be tempted to turn the screen off, but I beg you, please hang in there because my interview and conversation was really fascinating, and Quinsin was gracious enough to let us peek under the hood of his process, and it's really cool and inspiring, and he's got a lot of music to share, and we dug in there and unpacked it. So I hope you enjoy this, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
I'm interested in how people perceive it. Like you as a very accomplished musician, what you heard the most recent piece, you were like, that really sounds like classical music to me. But to me, I don't really hear it that way because there's so much, like, I wouldn't call it jazz, but I wouldn't call it classical. I certainly don't like being labeled third stream. I don't really find that's where I'm coming from, in terms of my approach. It's more like I'm just drawing on a lot of different sources that are interesting to me, and this is the way that I want it, this is the way I like to hear these different sounds working together. Maybe almost think of it in a Canadian way, like or how I was raised in a Canadian way, in that like the lofty ideal of a multicultural country, in these different cultures are welcome to interact and draw from each other, and it's not like this. It's more each individual or each group still having a strong identity and being able to maintain that identity, but not in conflict with others. It's about how you're going to bridge those or find commonalities. I mean, I grew up right in Toronto. I lived a couple of years at a old Victorian house, sort of between Toronto and London, Ontario, because my dad taught recording engineering at Fanshawe College in London, which is a smaller, about 2.5 hours outside Toronto, smaller city that had a college that taught there for a while. So we lived in this old country house for a few years, but then mostly in Toronto.
Oh, was your mom a composer or musician also?
Well, at a certain point, both my parents were doing electronic music. They were doing commercial and sort of experimental electronic music in the late 60s and early 70s. So we had they knew Bob Moog, and they had one of the
That's right.
One of the early Moog synthesizers, and they let me play around with that as a kid, which is super fun. So I grew up around a lot of music, and then my dad, having 2 kids, needed a little more security, and so he took the teaching gig, recording engineering.
Would we know any of their music? Like, is it?
They had some stuff on Sesame Street, like some little blips and bloops. There was a little orange animated character one that had a little spot on Sesame Street, and they did some other commercial stuff, like little commercial spots like that, because electronic music, like late 60s, early 70s, was like really exciting it hadn't really been explored that much.
t'aime, prends garde à toi.
Getting into was saxophone your first kind of
Well,
instrument? Or?
yeah, at that point, well, no, recorder was in, I mean, music was, at that time, music was a big part of the curriculum at school still. So, like fourth grade, took recorder, and then fifth grade, we had to pick an instrument for band if you wanted to do band, or you could do orchestra. And my dad had a saxophone. He played both drums and saxophone. He'd done that sort of professionally, just gigging through college and stuff to make money. So I now have this old Slingerland drum set here in New York, which is super fun to play on, and he had a tenor saxophone. So I would haul that back and forth to school, and started, I mean, often saxophone players will start on alto, but I started on tenor.
In fourth grade? Are you grade four?
That was
fifth grade.
Fifth
Still,
So
like
fourth grade was recorder.
you're probably this
which is
high, and the
actually-
tenor was probably.
Yeah, I had a special cart to help me carry
really?
the thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
So I knew your dad was a musician, but I guess I didn't realize he played saxophone
He
and
did
drums.
for a while. I mean, he was like, well, he is. He's one of these guys who does a lot of different things. He got into production more, and that was sort of his focus when he was teaching. But yeah, through college, he studied classical percussion for a year here. He moved around to a lot of different places and studied different things. Was interested in a lot of different stuff. I guess that informs a lot of my work ultimately as well.
Right.
But yeah, he studied classical percussion. He played drums in like rock bands on the weekends, and saxophone. He did a lot of things.
Did you ever play with him, like on gigs?
Well, we collaborated on a few things, like doing some electronic music stuff together, which was kind of fun. But and early on, he would help a lot with production stuff. He recorded me he had a lot of really nice vintage gear. He would record like demos and stuff like that at the house, and have people over and record stuff. So.
Are there early saxophone teachers that were?
Yeah, I had a really great saxophone teacher, Alex Dean. He's like one of the heavyweight players on the Toronto scene, and I connected with him in seventh grade. I went to like one of these summer, I think they still have them, like summer jazz camps or music camps.
Right. Yeah.
And he was not only a great player, he's a really great teacher, really funny, which at that age you're drawn to somebody who's going to make it fun and enjoyable. And thankfully, he was very great, really great player, and very knowledgeable too. So I stayed with him from seventh grade up through college. I followed him. He just gotten the teaching gig at University of Toronto when it was time for me to go to college, and so I applied and I followed him there stayed with him for a couple of years.
So you had the same teacher seventh grade through college?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's
And I studied other stuff too. He hooked me up in high school he was like, you better get some piano lessons and theory lessons. So I studied with a really great piano teacher, Frank Falco, for quite a few years, and through college too.
Are you still in touch with him? Is he still around? Or?
With Alex? Yeah. I just saw him when I was up there a few weeks ago.
Wow.
So yeah, we keep.
He must be really proud of his. I can't imagine.
He's. I mean, yes, but he also he's been teaching there for a long time. He's got a lot of students that are doing it like. Yeah. He should be
that's
proud
awesome.
of all the work he's done.
Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's a good teacher.
That's awesome. What was the University of Toronto like? What was your experience?
It was a great place to meet other people. They were just starting the program, so there was a little bit of. They were just settling in on how it was going to be shaped there. There was a lot of conflict with the classical department. At that point, they didn't even want the jazz program, which made it very just unnecessarily complicated and frustrating as a student there, especially when I love classical music. I mean, it's a huge part of what I do now, especially. And at that time, there was just a much more. That was a little frustrating.
Yeah.
But there were great teachers and great students. I learned a ton there. Got to play a lot. I mean, Toronto's a good scene. So, and U of T is right downtown, so I was close to clubs and other things. I got to hear a ton of great music, got to play a lot, and working with different people in different settings and contexts.
Was the Rex a big part of your college?
One of the staple, and it's still going, like one of the icons of the Toronto scene.
You can walk to the university from there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, then
that's-
jam sessions and did lots of gigs with lots of different people there. So I finished University of Toronto. I came to New York for a couple of years,
Oh,
like around 99, 2000, and 2001. I got a Canada Council grant, so like that helped make it possible, and was studying with some folks. We're getting a couple lessons with Rich Perry, which was super fun, and studying with Jim McNeely sort of off and on for many years. And then September 11th happened, and I had a job lined up, but unfortunately because of that, it ended up falling through, and so I was
Like a teaching job or a playing?
yeah, just a teaching recorder to little kids, but
Oh,
like it would
okay.
have been some
Yeah.
income so that I could manage. Like as we all know, New York is expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially when you know, and it was extra challenging because I only had like a kind of a limited work visa at that point. Like dealing with that, you know, it's like as a Canadian, you're a foreigner, so alien as the technical term. So after September 11th, I decided I'm going to go back to Canada and try to get what I need to get to be able to come back and get be able to at least level the playing field visa-wise. So I did that. What did I do first? I hung around in Toronto, played a little bit, was starting to do a bunch of projects and getting busy. I decided I wanted to get my master's degree. Just because if I didn't do it at that point, I probably wasn't going to do it. So I went to McGill to do that just for a change. The Montreal scene is really cool, very creative. I had lots of friends there. So I moved to Montreal and started the master's program. And then University of Toronto had a big shift in their personnel. And I got called to teach there. The head of the program, or head of the department, asked me if I'd be interested in coming back and teaching. So I worked it out with them that I could finish my master's degree while I was teaching, which was a little intense, but that's what I did. So,
Wow. Oh, that's amazing.
and then I taught there for like 4 years, finished my master's, and then I was like, I need to get back to New York. I've done enough stuff. I've got enough press. I have the requirements to get the visa stuff that I need.
Right, right.
So that's what I did.
Somewhere in those years, did you do I thought I knew that you did the monk competition.
Yeah, that was 2002, I believe.
So you were
So
back
I just moved back.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, that must
yeah.
have been exciting.
I mean, it's a competition, so those things are always odd. But I mean, they were amazing musicians. I mean, like Seamus Blake won it, and he played amazing. John Ellis was in it. Mark Small was there. Lauren Stillman and I went out and had a beer before the night before the competition. Like, it's all folks that are on the scene playing, doing stuff. So it was really. It was an honor to be included and be able to. I got to play for Wayne Shorter and Joe Lovano, it was amazing.
Yeah. What might you recommend to somebody new moving to the city today?
I mean, it's different than. I mean, I've been here 16 years now, so it's not including the very first time. So I mean, just the situation it's even more expensive and more difficult.
Do you think there's less work?
There are fewer clubs.
Fewer clubs,
So,
yeah.
I don't know. It depends. It just like always, like when people were. Before I moved to New York, I was asking tons of people, "What's it like in New York?" And you can't really. I mean, people would tell me what it's like, but you can't really. You don't really get a proper sense of it until you actually experience it. It's like one of those things you kind of need to experience. I mean, the best you can do, try to prepare so that, like, if you're coming from not somewhere in the States, then make sure you do get your visa stuff sorted out, or you know what's involved, because that's a big, long, complicated,
and expensive,
process. But otherwise, it's still expensive to live in the city. So if you try to make friends or have friends or connect with people that might be able to hook you up with some work of some kind, that's like, the teaching work thing was really helpful to have, at least as a base for at the beginning. And then just try to meet people and be open to playing and I mean, for any young musician anywhere, I think the best thing you can do is just be open to playing in any situation. You never know, like older musicians said to me too, which you probably heard too, like you just never know in whatever goofy situation you're in where like one of the other musicians will be somebody you work with most of your life. That has been a reality as well.
Yeah. I think probably you and I are similar, like getting our craft together, and then you kind of look, oh, well, what do I want to do with this? How have you found your voice in music?
First of all, I think it's a lifelong pursuit for all of these things, and craft too. Yes, absolutely. Thankfully, we get better as we go along and we spend time working on it. But I sort of feel like you're never going to arrive somewhere at like, aha, I have finished working on my craft. Here we go. Now I can move on to some other stuff. It's always like a patient and deliberate lifelong pursuit of that. And same thing with working at having a voice. I think it just needs to be a goal. And I think it's important that you consider that. When I was teaching at the university and was sort of trying to give some guidance towards that, it's important to have that as a goal rather than not think about it. I think it's like that you need to think about what it is that you are really drawn to, but then not obsess about it either, because you can't like force yourself into having a unique voice or sound. It's more, or the way I tried to guide my students at that point was like, let's listen and dig into a diverse group of sources or inspirations, and that can be, of course, to develop your craft, you're going to focus on the historical big icons and like dig into that and try to assimilate some of that into your voice and your playing. But then once you've done some of that, it's really important to look outside of music too, because like otherwise you're a craftsman or a craftsperson, and that that's can be impressive, but it's not necessarily like it's not about being an artist or about the sort of loftier goal of why I'm doing this, why we're doing this.
Who are some of the other people outside of music that you have looked?
Ton, like, well, I know you dive into poetry, but I like novelists. I try to read novels and think about that when I'm writing and playing music. Murakami, Salman Rushdie. I like magic realism. Garcia Marquez. I mean, again, with that, you spend your lifetime just reading and researching novels. So you gotta manage your time. But I think it's important to get outside of music, because those things are going to influence the music and lead you in directions that you would never go any other way. I like art. I was very fortunate. I got to do a tour through Europe a bunch of times, and I got to go and made sure I went to all the big art galleries and saw like what was happening at art. Especially 20th century art. I really like that, and now 21st century art. Mm-hmm. Like the first time seeing Kandinsky was just like, oh, this is different. Really great, really different. But even like Monet from what was coming before that, or Picasso, and just how I want to think about how would that possibly relate to music, and how would what they were doing with form and how they were doing with their craft, what they were doing with their craft to change it and reshape it and make it something that is very strikingly new, but still has a lot of depth. And especially somebody like Picasso, that has a huge connection to the history. Like he went through different periods where he was like, he's got the skill set to do pretty well anything, but he's moving in this other direction.
Craft is something that's important to you?
Well, absolutely.
Because I don't know, some people, or some musicians, it's only about craft.
I mean, I guess we do need craftsmen as well. I mean, like, it depends on what I know music was a profession for a long time. It's only in the last like 10 years, 15 years that it's become so difficult to actually do it as I mean, it just depends on what you want to do. I mean, here in New York, there's still musicals that people can make a decent living, and you can do a symphony gig. Like, you don't need to be like a blazing creative, conceptualist to be, play, fiddle and the symphony, like you need to be really great craftsperson. You need to know the repertoire. You need to be able to play and work with other people. It's different, similar but different skill set. You know, I mean, nobody's asking them to write symphonies. Like,
yeah, right.
so there is still a demand for craftspeople. You know,
I heard somebody say that we shouldn't even call it art because it's such on a continuum. We should just call it creative craft work, right? Because it's all like a sliding scale.
For me, maybe, but I mean, I find the craft work is very different than the artwork. For me, it is anyway. Like if it's more how I think about the craft work that I'm going to be doing, how it will help me do the creative work at this point. So I'm a little more conscious than I was before about like what I'm going to spend my time doing the menial labor of the craft work on. Because is this going to give me some language or give me some skill set that's going to help me do something that I'm going to be really interested in eventually? Because just again, it's just endless with that. Like you could, you know, dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the craft work or into the historical stuff that's going to give you more depth to your playing or more connection to the history. But that for me at this point, it's got to be a balance to like. I still feel it's really important to be working on that, and I'm spending hours every day still working on fundamentals and craft, but then I'm trying to steer it a little more in towards like how is that going to help me do what I want to do.
Who current musicians or current composers do you look for as, I don't know, models or inspiration or?
Well, you talked about him the other day, actually. I like Andrew Norman's work.
Yeah.
And found sort of the way that he's recontextualizing some of the orchestral colors. Quite interesting. I like Ingrid Labrock's work, how she's kind of weaving in these different influences. Carolyn Davis, I like her stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, especially here in New York.
I know.
We could go, if we could spend the rest
I checked out that the composer Brian.
Fernie who?
Yeah. Wow.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, and then I learned a new term called new complexity. I think
that's a whole movement that he's part of.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Would you put your music influenced by this new complexity?
In a way, I mean. I don't know if I'd be welcomed in that movement, just in terms of coming from different influences. But I mean, just being realistic. I mean, my music is much more in that universe of like, I'm not a minimalist composer by any means. Like there's always a lot of activity in what I'm drawn to that. So I do connect with the new complexity movement in that way. And some of the computer stuff that we will talk about in the night. That's sort of a direction I've been exploring the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years. So I guess that has a similarity. He does a lot of his music derived. I mean, he was doing this when computers were super clunky and not very good, but he was using computers to help him come up with, to aid him in his craft, in the development of his music. And that's kind of coming out of Xenakis in a way, like he was doing a lot of that before the computers could even do anything. And then he was working with computers to come up with some interesting results.
Now you have, is it 9 albums?
Or is it? I think this is the 10th.
This is the 10th, yeah. Okay. Well, Stars and Constellations is the 10th, or I know you've got another one.
No, I think Stars and Constellations.
Okay, so that's number 10. Wow. I know that it's obvious to me, but maybe not to everyone. Why is it important for you to put out albums?
Well, a few reasons. Practically, it helps you be able to get gigs. Eventually, you could like perform the music. But it's also like an important milestone and a landmark to document the music and sort of document that, like that's our way of making a painting. You know, like this is the stuff that I'm really into. Or a novel. I mean, I think really it's akin to those type of things. More like a novel in the amount of work and effort it takes to, or especially the projects I sort of take on. And it, you know, I'm not putting out like 5 records a year. It sort of happens every couple of years.
Yeah.
There's at least, you know, because there's just so much work and money involved in making it happen.
But I would say it's quite prolific output, though. like once every
It
1 or 2 years, is especially for the scale and kind of
I think with the
scope of
scale,
your-
it's a lot. I mean, yeah, I gotta rethink it. Maybe try to scale back some stuff a little bit.
Some more-
Everything's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like
Yeah.
the last project I just finished was really epic.
Was that the
for me.
biggest?
That was the biggest one I've
Yeah.
done with with a physicist and 4 filmmakers and a chamber orchestra with like
That's
improvising
right.
soloists and organizing all the, we did a premiere here in New York, premiere in Toronto, or doing all the logistics was
Yeah.
myself.
Stars and constellations. Yeah, I found this definition of algorithmic music composition. Would you describe? Would that be an accurate description
Can you
of
read it again?
algorithmic music composition? Is an active field of research which marries the fields of computer science and music composition to design computer systems that compose music. The applications of algorithmic music are wide-ranging.
I mean, that's a pretty science, or a pretty
Yeah.
computer way of thinking about it. I mean, I like to think about it a little more organically than that.
Mhm.
And we're not, when I'm working with it, I'm not designing a computer software system that's going to like generate music. Like that just seems so inhuman.
It seems a little cold, right?
Yeah, it seems a little too like coming from the computer science universe. I'm using it more as a tool. I think of it like a glorified pencil or computer. We already use computers to do most of our notation now. It's just like you gone are the days of handing it off to a copyist and then they'd all copy it by hand. We're pretty used to the copyist doing something more large scale. This is just taking it, a few steps further. And I'm still making a lot of artistic choices, aesthetic choices. It just helps me do some things that I couldn't do by hand, or that would take, or I was doing it and it would just take hours. Like I wrote this piece called Bounce for my group Flux that came out on Path of Totality, that came out in 2017 on Whirlwind Records. And so that piece used like the basic physics of a bouncing ball. Nothing really that complicated, something we see around us all the time. But I had to map all of that by hand to how I wanted it to go with the notes, how I wanted it to go with the rhythms. It just takes hours and hours and hours just for one little model of the ball. If I want to change that model of the ball, then I have to remap everything. It's just super laborious. Something a computer's great at doing.
Tell me the name of the computer program that
The one with a few, but the one that I'm working with mostly for this is Opusmodus. It's sort of a new-ish. I think it's, maybe 10 years old, maybe less than that. It's based on an old programming language called Lisp, which is list processing. It was used in the 60s and 70s, really important for artificial intelligence, which is a hot topic right now. But it is very good at taking lists and manipulating them, which in a lot of ways is what we do in music. We take a list of things, of notes and rhythms, of harmonies, and we want to be able to manipulate them in ways. So it's kind of well suited for that.
I explored Opusmodus, right? Yeah, there's a very nice tutorial that's like, we've talked a lot about this, and it was abstract in my brain, but to see this tutorial really, I get how
it practically works.
Yeah, I get how, and like, it is kind of limitless how you can use the data.
It's a tool, right?
Yeah.
So it ultimately just comes down to how much time you want to spend, like how crazy your idea is and how much time you're willing to spend making it a reality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of quick and dirty stuff it does that is really cool and kind of impressive if you don't know what it does. Like, and relative to doing stuff by hand, like it can transpose stuff anywhere. It can elongate, contract, like really easily. But it's more if you want to do something more imaginative with it, I would say, then you got to have an idea of how you want to make that happen with the computer, and knowing how the coding is involved, like how much it's just how much time. It's a time thing, really.
Hi, so I'm going to give a little demonstration of how I take some data and turn it into the piccolo introduction in the fourth movement of Patterns from Nature. I'm working here. You can see the screen is part of Opusmodus, which is a computer program that lets me use lines of code to manipulate data and then output music. And I'll show how I take that and turn it into music notation, and then we can listen to how the musician will interpret it. So the beginning here, a bunch of lines of code. For this introduction, I wanted the line to be an expanding curve, and that would move upwards to connect to the highest part of the very start of the movement. So we have these lines here, and we have some data. So for this beginning part, they generate this curve. These are the data points that I gave, and it's horizontal. So that's a little too horizontal. This is the shape that I'd like to use, and then I'm going to manipulate it so that it's moving upwards. So slowly, now it's moving more upwards. Now we're starting to connect it a little more to musical pitches. This is the third iteration. It manipulates a little more, then that changes the numbers. And then the fourth iteration, I think we're close to where I wanted it, and we generate a pitch series. So now this is the curve that I liked, and now each of these dots is going to be turned into a pitch. And so I can demo that little pitch series. Make it a little bit bigger. So there you can see the data, and then you can see it turned into a series of pitches. So then I use that as sort of the basis to build from. So then I'm going to turn that, each of these notes is going to turn into a chord sequence. So we can hear. And then manipulate it a little bit more. A little more connected. Another manipulation, one more manipulation, and then this one we add some rhythm to it. You get the idea. Then here is the one where we get close to what it's finally going to be. We start erasing some of these 16th notes, so it sounds a little bit more well, I found it to be more interesting and more musical. Let's see if we can get that to go. And so this will come up differently each time that we do it. So if I did it again, just the way I have it set up, there's some randomness involved. So it's the same idea, but the way it's kind of improvised in a way will be different each time. So I made I ran it many times and picked eventually the one that I really liked. So the next step is it comes out of Opusmodus in this kind of notation, and it will end up in Finale, which is a more music notation program. And then we can see it looking. I've added other more musical gestures and nuances for the player, so we can see that certain things are slurred, some accents in here, directions to the player. Now we can hear it as a MIDI mock-up, so if Finale were just to play it like a computer, this is what it's going to sound like. And you can hear it's all very even throughout the register of the instrument. Now when we actually hear what it sounds like with the actual musician playing, it's going to sound a little more extreme as we get to the higher registers. Now this is from Camille Watts playing it from our concert in Toronto. So you can hear as it moves up in the register of the piccolo, it gets more intense, and as it starts off in the bottom, it's not quite as intense. So that was something I was also thinking about. So that's a little demo of how I manipulated data in Opusmodus to come up with musical ideas for the piccolo introduction to the fourth movement of Patterns from Nature.
So for this project, Stars and Constellations, you took, well, explain what data you were using to make.
So I should preface it. I've been working on and off with this physicist, Dr. Stephen Morris at the University of Toronto. His area of research is emergent patterns in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been collaborating sort of on and off on a few different projects. Bounce was actually the first one where he helped me write a little program that would model the ball, and then I took that data and I turned it into music. But from there we've expanded, and then the most recent epic project we just talked about was like focusing exclusively on his work for a 4-movement giant work. We'll talk about that later. So we had worked a little bit on Stars and Constellations. So for 2 of the pieces, he helped out with that. The middle piece called Pendulum is based on the swinging pendulum slowly coming to a rest. So he helped me model that. For the last piece, Stars and Constellations, Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the archer in the zodiac mythology, and so for that he helped me model the actual star system in a 3D model, and so then I could twist and manipulate that and then turn that into melodic content or harmonic content or what rhythmic content, however I wanted to manipulate it. And then because it's the archer, I figured out how to plot like arcing arrows or arcing anything really. So and to be able to manipulate that, a lot of trig, had to go back and blow the dust off the old trig trig books. But it was kind of a fun dive into that, and it gave me, for me, it's just interesting because it gives me results that I would never arrive at any other way. And it's grounded. To me, it feels grounded in things that we see and hear and feel around us. So like how often do you see, you see a ball, or you see things fall. Gravity, we're affected by it all the time, and you see it all around us. It's just different when you hear it mapped to a string quartet. So at the beginning of the Stars and Constellations Sagittarius piece, it's all these arcing glissandi. And rather than just being like an improvised thing where I say, oh, try to improvise in the style, this actually is how it would be if you heard an arrow whistling through the air. That would be the right timing, and that would be the right height, and the right, it connects to reality in a more direct way. So here, all the landing points are stars within part of the constellation, and you can even just see it very visually here, like all the glissandi are arced from arrows shot from the string quartet from ground-ish level.
And so the notes that are reflections of the data as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And my manipulation of it. I mean, I'm not just like taking this and like sticking it there. I'm making a lot of choices, artistic choices about how I want to be. It's like a photographer in a way. Like it's like how I want to make sure that the angle, the way that it is something artistically interesting for me too. Yeah, hopefully the listener. But that arcing idea or motif recurs. It's like one of the binding elements of the piece. So it's sort of manipulated in very musical, or like music-related crafty ways through different points in the piece as well.
We didn't even talk about the videos that accompany
Oh yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, film has been a big sort of thing I've been sort of interested in the last 10 years, I guess. When I did that Path of Totality record with Flux, I commissioned 6 filmmakers to do little shorts. So I took these, that was a double album, double vinyl release, and I took these longish pieces that were like 15-minute pieces generally and condensed them down to like 2 or 3 minute little excerpts, but tried to make them have their own challenge. that was a new and fun challenge, to like condense a very long composed piece to something very short that still has some kind of, that is musically meaningful. So I gave them little it's not even excerpts, they're their own little pieces, sort of redux, I guess.
Like I imagine like a novelist being asked to take and make a short story or something out of.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, like or a 1-page like
Yeah,
summary. Right. I mean, some people are really good, like movies. They like some of the summaries of a movie are humorous and fantastic. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll see. Varying degrees of success. I made them. Was able to hand off like a completed piece of music, short music, that the filmmakers would then respond to. And it was interesting to see how each, it's 6 different filmmakers. It was interesting to see how they each responded. But I was really happy with how the work that they did, and it was really rewarding experience. Just occasionally I'd have to guide somebody, generally not very much. I mean, but occasionally just like try to steer the ship a little bit if it's not coming out the way you want it to. But that was a fun experience. So that was sort of what led to the most recent project with the 4 filmmakers and patterns from nature, working with a physicist. And that was a much more in-depth process. For that we were composing we collaborated with a physicist and composed the music and the film sort of at the same time.
But Stars and Constellation has also.
So yes, I'm
sorry,
getting ahead of myself.
yes,
back on track. Stars and Constellation is just that in timeline, Stars and Constellations, the films happened after. So
right.
For me, Stars and Constellations, I did the same thing that I did with the Flux thing. I condensed these really long, like 14 to 20 minute pieces down to like 3 minutes.
Oh.
A little 3-minute excerpt.
Right.
And it's because I was working with the computer and doing more computer-derived music, or that was an influence. I wanted to find filmmakers that were working in the computer realm, or working with, because there's a lot of really interesting software. In particular, Touch Designer is a really interesting program that one of the filmmakers is really, in Stars and Constellation, that's the pendulum piece. He's working with software that lets them do all kinds of really interesting things. But they all were actually they were just working with different software programs that all were really interesting. The landscape, the crazy 3D landscape one for Scorpio is really beautiful too, in a kind of other alien reality. So that was fun. And that was fun to work with the filmmakers coming from a very different, from a computer thing. And again, I didn't need to do very much steering. It was like I gave them it works and they responded to it.
Well, yeah, it's easier, right, when they already have the.
Yeah, one way or the other, it's an easier process when, like, if I hand somebody the music and then they can just go away and respond, like, deal with it. Or if somebody's, if you do, years ago I did some film scoring, somebody hands me a finished film.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm just going to respond to this. So it's a lot easier in a way, or there's less collaboration. It's less collaborative.
Yeah. In a lot of this music, I noticed something really unique is use of extended techniques and quarter tones, and how did, like, where does this come from for you?
Well, a few things. I mean, in jazz, there are a lot of extended techniques in order to get the blues scale feeling, and the sound is much more malleable. You know, we look back at like somebody like Coleman Hawkins, like his sound is like that. You know, that's not gonna, you're not gonna put that in an try to play an orchestral section. It's not what it's about. It's about all this personality and or any icon of the jazz language and jazz history. It's finding your own sound. It's a big sound concept and exploring. They wouldn't call it extended techniques, but it's just exploring the sound and being personal with the sound. So some of it's coming from that, and then some of it is coming from, I love contemporary classical music, and that was a huge element around, you know, the 60s onward, 50s, 60s onward, was like, in some ways they felt like, okay, we've done everything, we've destroyed harmony, we've broken it down to like serialized this, that, the other thing, we've taken harmony as far as we can go, melody we've really explored, what's left? So let's go timbral and really explore what is possible that hasn't been done on the instrument yet. And so that took on a whole bunch of different strategies, and later in the 20th century that took on other explorations, and like, okay, let's break down, why are we working with in the 12 equal divided tones? I mean, that's not really what happens in nature. I mean, that's you play a note, that's not how the intervals are within a note. So we could explore that as well as a whole different world. I mean, it's interesting because you look back at Renaissance music, or even earlier music than early Renaissance music, and there isn't it's not equal temperament. I mean, that's that mean tone or just intonation. It's listening to that as a way to get somewhere else is really interesting too.
Could I ask you to demonstrate some of those?
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Well, like multiphonic thing.
Yeah.
They're different alternate fingerings that get you these kind of odd sounding chords on the instrument. So you can just kind of pop those in, you know, you sort of learn what the notes are, and you can either use them in an experimental way, or you could play them like over top of, in a more harmonic setting. So
I'm springing this on you, but could you play something kind of like a solo saxophone work that incorporates that?
Super simple.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you can there's just, the saxophone is such a fun overtone instrument. Like, you can just sort of explore the different colors on the instrument, sort of blend in the different multiphonics.
Can I ask one? I think you mentioned that you are able to play quarter tones.
Yeah, I worked hard on getting some quarter tone fingerings or close to quarter tone fingerings, just to be able to, just to have some different colors. So,
yeah.
Some of them I gotta work. Some of them are less equally quarter tony than others, but
cool.
It's a way of getting. And some of them sound like they're all alternate fingering, so some sound stuffier than others. But I mean, it's kind of fun putting it into. It just gives you different. You can put it in more of a straight head context or.
Yeah.
Not.
So you've just recorded a new project.
Yeah, Patterns from Nature. Where to begin? It's an epic project, but it sort of, for some of the stuff I was talking about before, I really enjoyed working with this physicist, Dr. Stephen Morris. We collaborated a little bit on some projects before this, but I wanted to do something that would really focus on his area of research and would give me a chance to really dig into it and explore it with filmmakers, because I really enjoyed, from working on the Flux project and of course patterns from nature are going to be something that really lends itself well to something very visual. So I found 4 collaborators, Tina DeGroot and Lee Hutzuluk and Gita Black and Udo Prinsen. Tina and Udo are based in the Netherlands. Gita's based here in New York and Croatia, and Lee is in Vancouver. So international project. And Stephen, the physicist, is based in Toronto, although he's now retired and moved out to Vancouver. And so the idea for this project was I wanted a piece that would focus on sort of general areas that are under this emergent patterns in nature field. And so each movement is sort of one of the pillars of this field. The first movement is branches, second movement is flow, third movement is cracks, and the fourth movement is ripples. And so even within these, there are so many different areas to explore. So we had to sit and really hone in on a few things. So we had meetings where it was actually, and I wanted also the project to be a real collaboration rather than what we talked about before, rather than I write the music and hand it off to the filmmaker and then they respond to it, or the filmmaker hands me a film and then I respond to it. I wanted to try to get into using some of the science and some of the data or the ideas sort of as inspiration, and we would do some back and forth with each filmmaker. And each of us had a different way of working together, and that was great. That was really fun. Like Udo, he got some software. He started working with this Touch Designer program so he could actually take some of the data that Stephen had and turn it into visuals directly. And then some of the other filmmakers did not work that way. Like they're much more hands-on. But for example, Tina, whose area was branches, there's this really fascinating thing that happens in pottery, that a type of finish on the pottery, if you prepare the finish, it's one of the ones that works really well is with tobacco, actually. So you put this on whatever pottery you're doing, and then you dip ink on it, and instead of just expanding like you would think it would, it creates these branching formations. So it's something that just oddly enough happens in nature. And so Stephen can explain it all from the mathematical and physics aspect, but for Tina, it was just fun. She got her hands in there and made up this paste and experimented with it in all different ways, and then filmed it and then animated around it. So that was how she interacted with the data. And I took the idea of branches and used a lot of the software to generate little algorithms that would make tree-like formations.
And using the same sort of same principles, kind of, are, I guess, different data coming in, but the same computer software and kind of a similar process as stars and constellations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was written after Stars and Constellations, so I was a little more comfortable with the program. I was more comfortable diving into it and like getting a little deeper with it and spending, I could carve out more time to work on it. For me, that was how I sort of approached it. So each movement for me was digging into the data in different ways. But there was a lot of back and forth with the filmmakers as to how we wanted it to look and how we wanted it to feel and how we wanted the whole, I had to think about the whole thing overall. So I wanted to make sure that it had a real narrative arc to the thing as a whole. I was very careful of knowing the style that each filmmaker was working in, how I wanted that to be presented. I was really happy with how it all worked out and how it all turned out.
When will this be able to
hopefully the end of 2024 or early 2025.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
that little intro, like I wrote it down. I love how he says, the universe is filled with highly self-organized structures which pull themselves together somehow spontaneously, and we call these structures emergence. Patterns is like a technical term that happens for something freakishly amazing that we don't really understand,
Exactly. Well,
it's really exciting.
I mean,
it's a mystery.
That's where the fun part of the science, and I see that with it's kind of a different side of the coin. Like in the arts, we're looking at this mystery going, oh wow, that's fantastic, look at this, and I'm going to add my personal touch to this. And that with the science, they're like, wow, that's fantastic, how does that actually technically work? So they're digging in, but there's a commonality between where we're seeing this amazing unidentifiable thing and how we want to respond to it. How we want to, we're both amazed by this thing that happens, or this mystery or magic, you know, would be called magic in another context. I should also mention that, I mean, we call it Patterns from Nature because there's a series of books by Philip Ball, who's an amazing science writer, amazing writer in general, but especially science writer. He has a series of books called Patterns in Nature. And so we all use those as a source as well. Again, like Stephen, he's able to really break down and describe these complicated mathematical structures, or the way that scientists have been analyzing them, and explain it in a layman's terms with lots of beautiful, I mean, it's patterns in nature, so there's so many beautiful pictures. You can look at this amazing picture that he explains what some of the science is behind it, what research has been done on it, and why perhaps it forms that way, or why it is this way, or what we understand about it. But it's fascinating.
Fascinating. Is there anything that more that you want to talk about with either patterns from nature, or before we move on?
I mean, the only thing I would add was it was really, for me, it was super rewarding and really a pleasure to work with all the musicians as well. When it was such a different process for me to spend such a long time in the development and collaboration stage, but then actually I'm sure it was like this for the filmmakers too, because they were working on the component movements and they didn't really see it until when we finally got to put it all together. And then there was all the improvising that was happening as well, because there are featured improvising soloists through each movement. And everybody gets to add in there. That's where the magic, the mystery, like I kind of, you know, when you're writing for improvisers, it's like, I know kind of the general idea of what's going to happen, but then when you actually get to hear it and they bring their personality to it, it's the greatest.
What's new now? Now you've got this giant project. What's new on the?
Well, I have
what bigger project?
Next? No, not bigger, like smaller. I'm gonna have to do all the post work on that now. So I just sort of finished the first pass of editing, and then I got to do the mixing and figure out how I'm gonna eventually release it with the films. So there's that, but I also have a record in the can with Dan Weiss, Mark Elias, Yu Han Su playing vibraphone on some stuff, and Christopher Hoffman playing cello on some stuff, and then one piece that I wrote based on murmurations, bird murmurations. So that's like flocking patterns of birds. That's for 2 5-octave marimbas, and so Aaron Edgecombe is also playing marimba on that. So I have some editing to do on that, and mixing and all that. So that'll probably come out at the end of the year as well. I have a duo record with Mark Elias, just improvised duo that we did around the same time. So I got those 3 things will come out sometime in 2024, 2025. And then next year, thankfully, super busy. I'm writing a string quartet for the Molinari String Quartet. Probably we're going to do have a reading in May. Have a new piece for the Stars and Constellations group that I'm probably writing for June, and then I have a string orchestra project that's happening at the end of the year with Florian Hoffner, who's a piano player, good piano player, lived in New York for a while, teaches at Memorial University in Newfoundland now, but we're sharing the writing duties on that, so that'll be like really nice with a full string orchestra, percussion, flute, clarinet, French horn, myself, and rhythm section.
That's amazing. People might be interested or wondering, well, how do you get commissions and grants? Like, what does that look like? Is that, how do you do that? How do you go about getting that? How much time does it take?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's about relationships with people. I mean, it's like anything. It's like, how do you get a gig? I mean, it's sort of building relationships with people over time. And, I mean, I'm very thankful and lucky that I'm Canadian, so there is a Canada Council for the Arts that you could apply for funding. I mean, you compete for it, but if you dream up a really cool project and you put something interesting together, you got a shot at being able to do your project. And there are grants and things here in the States too that are worth checking out. What you want to do. Yeah, so sometimes it's grant funded, sometimes it's other sources. I mean, for this Patterns from Nature one, we there was just because of the scope of the project, there were a lot of different grants. We had a Fields Mathematical Institute gave us a good chunk of money, that was new for me, getting a math slash science grant mixed in, and that was really really cool and helpful. Yeah, it just depends on the scope. We'll start small if that's something you want to do, and go from there. But I mean, I've commissioned people out of pocket, like the filmmakers. I do that out of pocket, or have done that for my own releases. And some musicians do that, or ensembles do that. You just gotta build a relationship with them, and
do you spend a little bit every day working on the grant part, or is it
not every day? I mean, it'll be by project, but it'll at certain points it will end up sort of consuming my life. When it comes time to, you got to do just putting the proposal together takes a lot of. I mean, again, depending on the scope, but something with 60 people and filmmakers and a physicist is a lot of, there's a lot trying to condense that down into something that you can explain clearly, and also just like figuring out, a lot of time with Excel sheet. It's just logistics. This last year was a lot of time on logistics, and but it's part of it. If you want to do something, for me to be able to do something like that, that's what it takes. So,
are you comfortable telling a number? Like how much money a project like this past project costs?
I don't even know the exact number, but we did a concert here in New York and a recording and rehearsals, and we did a concert and an artist talk in Toronto. I mean, we're over $100,000 between those two projects, so it's significant, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of getting, raising the fund. I mean, that's just the reality. And Stephen and I didn't take any funds on this one. So in order to make the project happen.
Wow. That's a big number.
It is, but I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah,
now.
I know.
You start off.
It's just
off simple, you start off, you write for fine. If this is something you're interested in and you want to write for somebody else, get a solo instrument, find a friend, commission me, give me rent or whatever a week, and I'll write you a piece. And that's and that's the most important thing, really, not that part of it, but writing and getting to hear what you do is a huge part of the learning process. I mean, even at this point, thankfully at this point, I have my imagination of what it's going to sound like and how it actually sounds is a lot closer than it was decades ago. Like decades ago, I would write stuff and I would bring it in and be like, whoa, that didn't sound anything like I thought it was going to sound like. But you learn by doing that over and over. Like now, there were very few changes that were made on the last few projects, because what I'm imagining is pretty close, or it's only going to sound better with real people and real instruments. And if there is something that needs adjusting, it's like, okay, that I need to add more there to it's getting lost, or it's sounding a little too strained up in that register. Like it's more minor. That's the best thing, and that's how you try things. Like, will this work? You got to hear it.
Well, thank you, Quinsin, for your time. It was great to talk to you, and thank you for listening and dropping by, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.